Welcome back to another recording of the Unit 2 Databases unit, or more formally known as the Unit 2, Creating Systems to Manage Information. On this video, we're going to look at how we can complete Activity 4 in a way that will get you full marks. Now, what I won't be showing you on this video is how to do presence check, how to do length check, range check, table lookup, or format check. If you want to know how to do that, you need to watch the videos I did on Activity 2, where I show you how to do the table validation requirements when you're doing Activity 2. On Activity 4, I just want to focus on how do you get the evidence of what you did for Activity 2 and the different tests for Activity 4 to get full marks. Now, this is what you're presented with when you're doing Activity 4. It's the same 6 tests that you're provided with when you do Activity 2. Now we're trying to provide the pictorial evidence on Activity 4 that our database actually does all these 6 different things. Now, for context, Activity 4, it's a type of testing that they're doing. What they're trying to mimic in software development when we do testing, when you create a database, a software application or a website, you will do testing to check that your system is able to catch invalid data. And when it catches invalid data, it gives the user an error message to let the user know what is the data that they provided which was invalid, which allows them to be able to have another attempt at providing the correct data. If you're not able to tell them the data they provided which was invalid, it's less likely that they will be able to know, so they're more likely to continue to provide data that is invalid. So that's what they're trying to mimic on Activity 4. They've given you 6 different tests that they want you to prove that for this type of invalid data that your system doesn't accept it and it has different types of error messages. So what you'd want to do for Activity 4, the best practice, you know that you have 6 different tests. You open your learner file and you fill out the column for test number. You write 1 to 6. For type of test, you're going to put N. N means normal. You're going to put N for all the tests that you're going to do. Now, you're not going to lose marks if you indicate the type of test as normal for all the tests that you're going to do. Why? Because on the mark scheme, they're now indicating that when we're marking your work, we should indicate the type of test that the student has selected. What that means for you is you're not going to lose marks if all the tests you've put normal. And I think anyway, from 2022, they've got rid of this column altogether. So if they reintroduce this column, don't panic, just put normal, you're not going to lose marks. Now you can start to do your first test. So for each of these tests, you're trying to indicate the test data that you're going to use when you're doing the test. So for test number 1, we're trying to test that a record will not save without the student's surname being present. So we're going to provide the indication of the test data that we're going to use for this test. So I'm going to add a new record. And I'm going to indicate for each column, for each field, what data I am going to provide when I'm doing test number 1. So I'm going to indicate test data for all the columns except for student surname, because student surname is the test that we're doing for test number 1. It needs to be blank. So a common mistake students make on this part of the test table and test data, they start to explain what they are going to do for the test. The column reads test data. We don't want explanation. We want the data that you're indicating you're going to use for this test. So we've got student ID, student first name, student email. Student ID, I'm going to enter the number 8 when I do my test, or number 9 is completely fine. For name, I'm going to put Susan. Surname, I'm going to put blank. This indicates that I'm not going to provide anything here. Or if you wanted, you could put a continuous underscore like that above work. And for the surname, this is what I'm going to put. So this is the test data that I'm going to use. Now, you need to make sure for each of the 6 tests that you're going to do, that the test data you use when you do the test in Microsoft Access, that it matches the test data that you indicated on your test table. because scientifically speaking, if the test data you use is mismatching with what you indicated in your test plan, would indicate that your testing is inaccurate because you did not use the test data that was specified on the test plan. So we'll do the test. Student ID, we'll put 9. Susan. Then I press enter. And this is the error message. So on my screenshot, I need to make sure that we can see both the test data that I used and the error message that came up. So that's my evidence for test number 1. So we move on to test number 2. And I forgot to enter the expected result. So expected result would have been an error message indicating the user must provide the student's surname. Now I'm just going to copy this test data for test number 2 because I know we're still working within the student table. Susan, I'm going to give her a surname, I'm going to give her Frost, and I'm going to change this. Right. I'm only doing this because I know what test we're doing for test number 2. So test number 2, a record will not save if the student's email is in the correct format. The correct format, obviously, it ends with washer.ac.uk. So to provide test data where I'm going to have an email in the incorrect format, I'm going to have the student email without .ac.uk. I'll change this to FR. So an error message indicating that the email is not in the expected format. So I change this to Frost. Use FR. AC. I press enter, and this is my error message. For email, this is absolutely correct. If you did your format check correctly, this is the error message you would expect for anything involving email. You're not going to get an error message indicating that the email is in the incorrect format. Okay. Test number 3. A record will not save if the subject level is below the accepted range. So to know what's the accepted range for subject level, we need to go back to the brief. We need to go to the scenario. And as soon as we get to the scenario, you can see over here. The college offers a range of subjects from level 1 to level 3. So that is the range. So if we're doing test number 3, and test number 3 is that a record will not save if the subject level is below the accepted range. The only number that can be below that we can use is 0. So we're going in a different table now. We're no longer in the student table. We're heading over to the subject table. So I'm going to add a new subject ID, and the ID is going to be number 6. The subject title is going to be GCSE History. And the subject level is going to be 0. Expected error message or expected result, an error message telling the user the subject level must be between 1 and 3. Now I'm going to do this here. So test number 4, a record will not save if the subject level is above the accepted range. So this is a similar test. So I'm just going to copy this test data, and I'm just going to change the subject level from 0 to 4 for test number 4. And the error message is going to be exactly the same. So all we're changing between test number 3 and test number 4 is the values for our test data. So GCSE History, subject level 0. Now, if you're wondering how I'm able to take screenshots like this without having to go back to Snipping Tool each time, if your student and your IT department allow you, the keyboard shortcut you'd need to use is free letters or 3 keys that you need to press at the same time. So you'd want to press the Windows key, the Shift key, and the letter S. If you press those 3 keys together, that's how you're able to get snipping tool, as you're seeing here. So I do the second test where I change this to 4. And there we go. So we're nearly done. Now we only have test number 5 and test number 6 to get through with. So test number 5, we're testing a record will not save if the subject being taught in a class is invalid. So read the test carefully. We're not testing if the class is invalid. We're testing if the subject being added to a class is invalid. So we head over to the class table. Oh yeah, useful tip. If you ever get an error and Access is not letting you do anything, just keep pressing the escape key on your keyboard. That usually resolves it 99% of the time. So we're going to add a new class ID. We're going to add a new class, and we're going to add a subject ID that doesn't exist in the subject table. So I'm going to try and add subject ID number 7. So the test data will have class ID number 7. We'll have class start date 20 October 2022 and subject ID. We're going to have number 9. So my expected result is an error message telling the user the selected subject ID does not exist in the database of the subject table. This will all make sense once we obviously see the error message in action. So we go to class number 7, 20 October 2022. Subject ID number 9. There we go. So the error message, you cannot add or change a record because a related record is required in the table TBL subject. So that is the same error. It's indicating the user that either you've not provided a subject ID that exists in the subject table, or the one that you've provided does not exist. So for test number 6, we're doing something similar. A record will not save if the student being enrolled into a class is invalid. Again, we're not checking if a class is invalid. We're checking that the student is invalid. So we're going to a different table now. So we're trying to indicate if we try to add a new student that doesn't exist, we should then get an error message. Right? A record will not save if the student being enrolled into a class is invalid. So if we try to enroll a student that doesn't exist into a class, we should get an error message. So we'll go to the student table. So I'm going to use student ID number 10 because we don't have that. Number 10, class ID, we'll use number 2. So this will be a similar message, an error message telling the user the student ID selected does not exist in the database of the student ID table. We do that test. We type in 10 here. We type in 2. And this is our error message. Right, and that is how you complete activity 4, folks. So remember, test data, you're not explaining what you are going to do. You're indicating the test data that you're going to use for your test. Expected results, that's where you go ham with all your explanations. This column, we're not using this column because we know how to do every single test required. You'd only use this column here if for some reason you didn't get the expected result, or your format check or your table validation rule was not working in the way that they expected it to work. Okay, so I hope this video helps, that you'll be able to get your full marks. So if you follow the same approach for activity 7, where you'd put the test number, the type of test as N, and you indicate the field and the test data you're going to provide, you should be getting full marks for activity 4 and activity 7. I'll catch you on the next one.